You're probably thinking this sounds like one of those videos that promises something for nothing and delivers a list of vague tips that don't actually add up to anything good. Hold on to that doubt because I'm about to give you real numbers you can check yourself, not just a feeling. Feed typically eats up somewhere between 60 and 70% of the total cost of keeping a flock. On my own farm, what I actually buy in bags from the feed store has dropped to a small fraction of what I used to spend most months, close to nothing at all. That's not a trick, and it's not one clever hack. It's 4 or 5 small systems running together, and I'm going to walk you through every single one with the actual steps so you can do the math on your own place before you ever try it. My name's Walter. I've kept chickens on this farm for years, and the bag feed bill used to climb every single season the same way everyone else's does. What changed wasn't one clever hack. It was building 4 or 5 small systems that each replace a slice of what a bag of feed was doing, so that by the time you stack them together, the actual purchase feed becomes a backup, not the main course. First, and this is the one that does the most work with the least effort, free ranging. If you've got any open space at all, letting your birds actually range across grass, brush, and open dirt lets them forage bugs, seeds, and greens on their own all day, and it's consistently one of the most effective ways to cut feed costs, because a chicken that's genuinely out foraging for 6 or 8 hours a day is doing a real chunk of her own feed shopping without you spending a dime. If predators or a garden you're trying to protect make full free ranging risky, even a large movable pen you shift across fresh ground every few days gets you a meaningful piece of the same benefit. And it has the added upside of spreading manure evenly instead of letting it pile up in one spot. Second, fodder, and this is a system that changed the most for me, especially in winter when there's no pasture to speak of. Here's the actual process, step by step, because the details matter more than people expect. You start with a cup or 2 of whole, untreated grain per tray. Barley works especially well, though wheat and oats do fine too. Soak it overnight in water, then drain it the next morning and spread it in a shallow tray with drainage holes in the bottom. No soil needed at all. From there, you rinse it with fresh water once or twice a day. Morning and evening works well, draining it fully each time so it never sits in standing water and goes sour. By day 3 or 4, you'll see white roots pushing down and green shoots pushing up. By day 6 or 7, that single cup of dry grain has turned into a dense mat of green sprouts and roots that can weigh 4 to 6 times what you started with. And you pull the whole mat out, roots and all, and set it in the run. I keep a rotation of 6 or 7 trays going at once, staggered a day apart, so I'm always pulling one finished tray out while starting the next, which means fresh greens land in front of my flock every single day of the year, including the dead of January when there's nothing growing outside at all, because the grain multiplies in both weight and volume as it sprouts. You're stretching a bag of seed considerably further than you would just scattering the same grain dry. The one failure point to watch for is mold. If a tray smells sour or you see fuzzy white or colored growth instead of clean roots, that batch didn't get rinsed often enough or didn't drain fully between rinses. Toss it and start over rather than feeding it out. It's cheap enough to lose a tray and not worth the risk to your flock. Third, black soldier fly larvae. And I know the word fly turns some people off before they even hear the rest of it. So let me explain why it's worth getting past that. These aren't house flies, they don't bite, and they don't spread disease the way people assume. They actually look more like small wasps as adults. The setup is simple. You want a container with some depth to it. A 5-gallon bucket or a plastic tote works fine with a ramp built from a piece of wood or hardware cloth leading up and over the rim toward a collection container on the outside. You add kitchen scraps and food waste to the bin, and once the larvae show up, which usually happens naturally if you're anywhere in the warmer half of the country, they consume that waste shockingly fast. Some research puts it at reducing the volume of food waste by 50 to 95%, depending on conditions and temperature. Here's the clever part of a well-built bin. When the larvae are ready to pupate, their instinct is to climb up and out of wet material, looking for someplace dry, which means they climb that ramp on their own and drop straight into your collection container, so you end up harvesting them without ever having to dig through the bin yourself. What you're left with is a steady, self-replenishing supply of larvae that are genuinely excellent protein and fat for your flock, and chickens go after them with real enthusiasm. Most guides suggest you can comfortably replace around 10% of your regular feed with larvae to start, and some backyard keepers running a well-established bin report offsetting closer to a third of their total feed cost once the system's dialed in. A couple of practical notes on placement: keep the bin somewhere with decent airflow and out of direct afternoon sun so it doesn't overheat, and keep the lid or a mesh cover on it loosely, tight enough to keep larger scavengers and your dog out, loose enough that the adult flies can still come and go to lay more eggs. Lower moisture scraps break down cleaner and draw fewer of the ordinary house flies you're not trying to attract. So if you're getting more of those than you'd like, cut back on wet scraps for a few days and add some dry bedding material to balance it out. Fourth, kitchen scraps and garden waste, the oldest trick there is, and still one of the most reliable. Vegetable trimmings, stale bread in modest amounts, cooked rice, wilted greens from the garden, all of it is fair game. But I want to flag the real safety side of this clearly, because getting it wrong actually matters. Avoid avocado skin and pit entirely. They contain a compound that's toxic to chickens. Skip chocolate and anything with caffeine. Don't feed moldy food of any kind. Mold can produce toxins that are genuinely dangerous to a flock. Go easy on raw dried beans. They contain a compound that's toxic unless properly cooked. And keep onion and garlic to small, occasional amounts rather than a steady daily habit, since large regular quantities can affect their blood cells over time. Within those limits, scraps are a completely legitimate, free daily supplement that a lot of people are already generating and just throwing away. Fifth, growing a dedicated forage crop specifically for your flock. And comfrey is the one I'd point you to first. It's a hardy perennial that comes back year after year without replanting, tolerates poor soil, and produces an enormous volume of protein and mineral-rich leaves you can cut and toss straight into the run. Once it's established, a small patch keeps producing cuttings all season with basically no ongoing input from you beyond the occasional trim, and most varieties will regrow fast enough that you can cut the same plants every few weeks right through the warm months. 6, if you got a pond or even a stock tank, duckweed is worth knowing about. It's a small floating aquatic plant that reproduces explosively in warm weather, runs remarkably high in protein for a plant, and chickens genuinely like it. You can skim a portion off the surface regularly without setting the population back at all, since it regrows that fast, sometimes doubling in area within a few days under the right conditions. 7th, and this one takes a little networking rather than growing anything yourself, local food waste. A lot of bakeries, grocery stores, and even breweries end up with genuinely good waste they're just throwing out. Day-old bread, produce that's a little too soft to sell, spent grain left over from brewing beer, which is still packed with protein and fiber even after the brewing process is done. A short conversation with a local business is sometimes all it takes to set up a standing arrangement, and it costs you nothing but showing up with a bucket on a regular schedule. Same goes for asking around at a local farmer's market near closing time. Vendors are often glad to hand off produce that didn't sell rather than pack it back up and haul it home. Eighth, letting chickens work pasture alongside other livestock if you've got any. Chickens, following cattle, goats, or other grazing animals will actively pick fly larvae and bugs straight out of manure piles, which sounds unglamorous, but it's a genuinely effective free protein source, and it does double duty, breaking up and spreading that manure across the pasture at the same time, which your soil benefits from too. Ninth, and this is the piece most people skip because it only matters a few months a year, adjusting for winter specifically. Foraging drops off hard once the ground freezes and the bugs disappear, so this is exactly when the fodder trays and any stored black soldier fly larvae you've dried or frozen earlier in the year start carrying more of the weight. I dry a portion of my summer larvae harvest specifically for this reason. Spread thin on a screen in a warm, airy spot until they're fully dried out, then stored in a sealed container, so I've still got a protein source to hand out in February when nothing's crawling around outside. It's not a large stockpile, but it's enough to keep the protein gap from opening up too wide during the leanest months. Here's the actual math I'd encourage you to run on your own place, since I promised you numbers instead of vague promises at the start of this. Take what you spent on bagged feed last year, divide it by however many months you were buying it, and you've got your baseline. Then track it again after 2 or 3 months of running, even just the fodder trays and a scrap routine. Most people see their purchase feed drop by a third to half within that window alone before the larger systems like a larvae bin are even fully established. That gap is real money, and it's yours to verify rather than take my word for. Now, I want to be straight with you about what this actually adds up to, because I promised you real numbers at the start of this, and I'm going to keep that promise all the way through. None of this makes feed costs zero, not really. You're trading a chunk of the bag feed bill for your own time and a bit of setup, tending fodder trays, checking a larvae bin, cutting comfrey, driving to pick up spent grain. That's a real cost too, just one that shows up as effort instead of dollars. And you'll still want to keep at least some quality feed on hand as a base, especially through the depths of winter or molt, when your flock's nutritional needs are highest and foraging alone won't fully cover it. What all of this together actually does is turn purchase feed from the entire diet into a backup and a balancer, which for most of the people I know running this kind of system cuts the actual feed store bill by well over half, sometimes closer to the whole thing during the growing season. Here's what I'd suggest if you want to start easing into this instead of trying to build everything at once. Start with fodder trays. They're the cheapest and fastest system to set up. A few dollars in barley and some stacked containers with drainage holes gets you going the same week. Add a kitchen scrap routine right alongside it, since you're probably already generating that waste daily anyway. Once those two feel easy, look at whether a black soldier fly bin makes sense for your setup. It's the biggest single lever for cutting the protein portion of your feed bill, which is usually the most expensive part of any commercial bag. Give each system a couple of weeks before you judge whether it's working. Fodder trays especially take a round or two to get the soak and rinse timing right for your own climate. I'll leave you with the bigger point because it's the same one I keep coming back to no matter what part of the farm I'm talking about. A bag of commercial feed is convenient, and there's nothing wrong with leaning on it, especially while you're building these other systems up. But convenience always has a price built into it. And once you start replacing pieces of that convenience with things you're already generating anyway, scraps, garden trimmings, a bit of grain, and water on a shelf, the savings add up faster than most people expect, and your flock usually ends up healthier and more active for it besides. Tell me in the comments what you're already doing to cut your own feed bill. I read every one of these, and I want to know what's working in your specific setup, because climate and space change what makes sense more than people realize. And if you've tried a black soldier fly bin yourself, tell me how it went. I know the idea makes some of you nervous, and I'd like real experiences to point people toward. Next time, I want to walk through the exact same approach for cutting the cost of feeding goats and rabbits, because a lot of these same systems overlap more than you'd think. Until then, look at what you're already throwing away before you look at what you need to buy. And remember, the bag of feed should be your backup plan, not your only plan.